Let's talk briefly about Ldap and RDP. The Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, or LDAP or Ldap, is used to access and maintain distributed directories of information, such as the kind involved with Microsoft domains. Microsoft refers to this as Active Directory and also directory services. It includes the user accounts, computer accounts, groups, and the authentication and permissions involved with all those items. To have this running in a domain, to have a domain in Windows, at least one Windows server must be promoted to a domain controller. When you do this, one of the things you're doing is you're installing LDAP, and it runs on inbound port 389 on that server. A more secure version of LDAP, Secure LDAP, can also be installed and configured. This runs on port 636. Let's show an example of a Windows server. This is server 2012. And when you have a regular server, by default, when you install it, you get access to file and storage services. That's installed by default. But if you want this server to be in charge of a domain, if you want to have a domain and have the ability to have all these user accounts and this directory structure stored centrally, then you have to promote the server to a domain controller. And that's what I've done with this server. And you see here, it is running ADDS. That's Active Directory Domain Services. So that is running. To do that, you also have to have access to a DNS server, either locally or somewhere else. Generally, locally is going to be better. A separate server would be better, but I just installed DNS on this same box. So we installed DNS, we installed Active Directory, and now it's running. So at this point, what we have is the ability to create user accounts and store them here and create all the permissions for any files that they're going to need access to and have it all associated within Active Directory. So let's take a look at a console that I've created here. And you can see that I have the Active Directory users and computers snap-in here. That's what you use to configure your users and computers within the domain. There's other Active Directory snap-ins as well, but this is the main one we need to show here. If we open that, we'll see the dpro42.com domain. That's the domain I chose for this particular server and for this particular domain. And if we open that up, we'll see lots of options, and we'll see the computers that are members of the domain and users that are members of the domain and groups, as well as local users that can access this server like the administrator account. So all this is part of Active Directory, and all this is part of LDAP or Ldap, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Now, for remote control of systems, Microsoft uses the Remote Desktop Program, which is based off of the Remote Desktop Protocol, RDP. This works in three ways. First, users could be given limited access to a remote computer's applications, and only those applications. Secondly, administrators can be given full access to a computer so that they can troubleshoot problems from another location. And third, another part of the program, known as Remote Assistance, allows users to invite a technician to view their desktop in the hopes that the technician can fix a problem. And these invitations can be made via email and otherwise. The RDP default port is 3389, 3389, but it can be enhanced with FIPS and possibly utilize TLS running on port 443. So there's ways to make this more secure if necessary. Let's go back to our server. And this connection that I'm making right now is actually using Remote Desktop. I'm remoting in from my workstation into this server, which is the IP address 10.252.0.103. And so I'm controlling it as an administrator from my remote system. Let's take a look at our PowerShell here. And let's run the netstat command with the -an parameter. When we do so, we get a lot of information. I'll just break out of that. And you can do a lot of different options with netstat. But if we take a look here, and here's the beginning of the list, our active connections. And if we look down here, we'll see a TCP connection. This is the server. This is the local computer, the server, 10.252.0.103. And we see that port 3389 is open. So we know that it's accepting, or at least listening for, remote desktop connections, RDP. And we do see that this one is actually established. If we look over here, we have the listening port. This is the actual listening port. All zeros, 3389, says it's listening. But this is an actual session. This one is established on 3389, coming from 10.252.0.254. That's my workstation. That's me connecting right now to this system. And it doesn't really matter the port that I'm using to connect. That's dynamically assigned by the operating system. What's important is port 3389 that's being used by RDP. You might also notice that this system is listening on 389, that's Ldap, and 636, secure Ldap. So netstat with the -n parameter for numeric, or -an for numeric with TCP and UDP connections if you need to run it. You might also use NAB to add in the executable for each of these sessions that are actually running. Okay, so for the exam, know what Ldap is and understand the ports that it might use. And if you have the ability, if you have an extra system or perhaps a virtual machine that you could install, consider downloading an evaluation copy of Windows Server, which is free during the eval time, and promote it to a domain controller and check out the different options that you can have, and maybe create a user account and kind of get into Server a little bit if you haven't already. And then you can also connect to that server remotely from your workstation using RDP. So try doing all that stuff, and then make sure, again, you know the ports, the regular port for Ldap and the secure port, and also the RDP port that's used by default. Okay, so a little bit about Ldap and RDP, and that's it for this video.